In 1932, Mary and Olan Mills started a photography business that would go on to become the nation's studio. In the over 75 years it existed, Olan Mills employed countless thousands of people. Some would only work a short time, while others would launch careers that spanned decades. These employees were part of a company that provided more than just photos. They preserved memories for future generations. They documented the fashion and the trends of the times, and they captured the young faces of those who would inevitably grow old, bringing to each a bit of immortality. These are the stories of the people of Olan Mills.
In this episode, Deborah Poole.
I started in June of 1973, and I started in telephone solicitor, which I was horrible at. And I stayed there for about a month, and the appointment secretary at the time position came open. And at that time, this was a very small building that we were in, and the appointment secretary was in the same room as the telephone solicitors. So she was fixing to leave, and I asked if I could get that position, and I kept that position till I think it was in 1977 when I became photographer. But I had been the photographer that was there whenever that taught me photography. She had been there for a year, maybe going on 2. And there were other photographers before that. In fact, the manager that hired me, her name was Carol Mills. She wasn't related, but I did the appointment secretary for, I think it was 4 years, right? And I took over photography in May or June in 1977 because the girl had gotten married and moved to Venice, Florida. And I was a photographer there up until 94, I think. I stepped out of my position because I had carpal tunnel in my hands. I had surgery, and they told me that I needed to change positions. And I didn't really understand how I got it being a photographer, but I lifted a lot of children. And at that time, we had a 150-pound posing table. Even though it was on rollers, I just would roll it from one side of the room to the other, and it just took a wear and tear on my hands. So I come out of that and went to Orlando for 2 weeks and was trained in sales as a proof consultant for, I want to say, maybe 3 or 4 years. And then I went back into photography because my hands was hurting again. And it didn't make sense to me. If I'm gonna be hurting and not doing the job I love, it didn't make sense. You know, I like sales okay, but I'm just not a good salesperson. I'm okay, but not great. I'd rather be in the camera room. So I went back to the camera room, and I was there until 2013, whenever I quit and retired. And I was manager for a while, and I gave that up shortly, just a few years before I retired, because I just didn't want to be a manager. I wanted to, in fact, we had moved from a studio into a belt store, and I just felt like I just wanted to focus on the camera room. And as it turned out, I was still doing both, photographing and selling. So as the company changed, you know, my husband wasn't doing well, and I needed to be with him more. And, you know, I was within a couple years of my retirement anyway, so I just went ahead and left. And I miss it. I miss rolling around with the babies and photographing the children and the families, because I did a lot of different characters, so to speak. From clowns to football mascots and cheerleaders and football players and dancers, and you name it, I've done it. I was in Gainesville 99 or 98% of the time. There were times that I went to Tallahassee and worked a couple of weeks there. I've been to Jacksonville and worked a couple of weeks there. I've worked in Ocala there. I've even went down, well, we were in meetings, but I was in there for a couple of weeks too. So I've been a little bit of everywhere around Florida. When we first started, we were with Jacksonville, and then we left Jacksonville and went with the Orlando area. And we were there for a few years, and then we went back to Jacksonville, back to Orlando, and finally ended up with Jacksonville on the end, you know. And it was just, whenever they started getting rid of district managers, I don't know, I just felt like in the beginning when I started, it was a great company, and Olan Mills had quality of work that was no one, in my opinion, could match. You know, all the other, and there was even a studio in Gainesville that did nothing but bridals, and they did paintings and stuff like that, and they did okay work, but I don't think they ever, in my opinion, matched us in the camera room. And that's what Olan Mills stood for. And Olan Mills taught me everything I know. I mean, I never worked a public job when I started. I turned 19 just a few weeks after I started. And so I was there, and like I said, to 2013. And I learned everything. They taught me how to be a manager. They taught me how to sell. Whether I did it all right, undoubtedly I must have done it good at some point. Phil Benier, he was head over photography out of Atlanta, Georgia, and Chattanooga and all of that, because they just eliminated all of the district managers, the individuals for each areas. And but Phil Benier is a very excellent photographer, and he was our overall manager, and he would introduce me the last few meetings I went to as being the senior photographer for our area, for Florida, for Orlando, from, I guess, Orlando and Jacksonville area, because I've been there the longest and I was the oldest, probably the oldest. I liked everything they taught me. I felt I learned it very well, and I was very, Olan Mills right down the line, and I still am. And when they sold it off to Life Touch, they told us we were going to be the same, but Life Touch was going to be over us. And of course, that wasn't the case. It changed everything. I actually got an opportunity to go to Chattanooga only one time, and Heidi Hauser was the big district manager over everything, and she offered me to fly to go, but the flights out during that time, it was during winter, and although we don't get snow down here, if we get snow up higher, we're not going anywhere. They didn't have any planes in Jacksonville, which was closest to me. I'm like an hour and 30 minutes from there. I would have had to drive all the way to St. Petersburg, which was almost 4 hours, to catch a plane to fly back up. And I'm like, no, my husband didn't like that, and I didn't like it either, so I just didn't go, but I wish I had now. I didn't know that would be my only chance. Whenever I would call up, there was lots of people, at least 2 or 3 people I talked to in the plant. And then even before that, whenever I had issues with people's portraits that they bought, and if I had questions, I could always call up there at the plant. And George was one that I talked to a lot. George was at the plant, and he was great at photography, and really helped me a lot too. I learned a lot from Otto Evans. He was district manager over the area, Orlando area, and he trained me, or at least helped me in the photography. And this was before they had just angles just bust shots. And when we went to full figure people, adults this is, and children that didn't sit on a table, he helped me a lot with the angles and the tilting of the heads and stuff. And children, you just learn to eat bubbles and roll balls off your head. I got to be known as a bubble lady with some of my kids. And I actually got to see like the third generations come in, and some of the families really respected me for that. And I have one family that had to have a 3-generation with me in it. And there was a certain red velvet chair that I used it for so many years, and I could do it with low lighting and all kinds of neat things with it. And I photographed this woman's little girl in it, and she wanted her daughter photographed in it, and then I had to be in a picture with the 3 of them. That was my level of wanting to win something. I was never really motivated to do the games that they played, but I got pushed into a lot of them, and I was glad I did, but I'm just not one like that. And my high was seeing the faces of the people come in, and they were happy, and they come back, and they had special things they wanted me to do, and just pleasing the customer. I really enjoyed working with people. I learned a lot. I started out with a Nord camera, where you look through the little viewing box. I started out with that, and I went to the next one. I think that was the 108, where the stand, you could stand away from it with the trigger, and you'd be able to adjust the stand, the tri-stand, to where it went up and down, and you could move the camera and things like that. And then we went to a 35 millimeter, still on a stand. So yeah, that was interesting. The really bad thing is whenever you got used to looking in the monitor, when we went from the viewer to the monitor was backwards. And then whenever I would talk to my customers, I was, instruct them how I wanted them to sit, to stand, whatever. And I'd use their right and their left. And it was really crazy that when I get out on the highway years later, I'm backwards. I know how to read backwards, upside down, and I know your right and left better than I know my own. You have to be careful if you ride with me not to tell me turn right or left, because I will actually go where it's in my head at. My last boss over me, she asked me to help train some of the girls she was hiring. And I said, no problem. I was in there training them, showing them how to work this and that. And she didn't know a lot of the mechanism of the 35, and didn't know how to do some of the things on it. So I was watching her later, and I noticed that her lights were all wrong. So I went in there and straightened them, and she gave me the dirtiest look you could have imagined. Like, how dare you? Well, you're doing it wrong. I don't care if you're my boss or not. That's great. But if you're wrong, you're wrong. She didn't appreciate it, so. There were people like that throughout the whole company. Most of the time I had good people that I worked with, I worked for. I never did like the way that we were booked. They would be 5 every 15 minutes. You were allowed 5 minutes with an individual, 10 minutes with a group. And if you've got children, forget that. You might as well throw it out the window, because it's not going to work that way. And, and I had people waiting hours, and I tried so hard. But in the 80s and 90s, I think that's when I was shooting the most. I'd shoot 40 a day and was expected to shoot 40 a day. And that would be 5 days a week. And later, it wasn't that many, but they were always crowded. The booking was crazy, and you had to deal with irate people. Had a guy cuss me out one night, and I was photographing his family, and they had waited a couple hours. And when I went to take him back, he stood there in my face, almost nose to nose, cussing me out, and I'm just standing there taking it because I didn't think it was professional to bite back at him. And so I let him go and do his thing and say what he had to say. And when he got done, I said, "I'm sorry." And I said, "Okay, sir, I need you to go stand over here. And sir, I need you to stand there, ma'am. Turn this way." And I went right into my spiel of setting them up to photograph them, and just photographed them. When I got done, he left out first, and some of the other members thanked me, and that was some bad stuff that you have to deal with. But there was times that it was so good. And one thing about Florida, they did at one time for several years, they had contests and that kind of things. And when we had a business meeting to go to and to kind of refresh our sales, refresh our photographing, refresh our spill for making appointments and telephone soliciting, all this kind of stuff, they would have contests and to see who won this and that. And you would get ribbons here and there for first place, second, whatever they had at that time. So we were always, in a way, compensated. You didn't get more money or get a higher rate or a higher raise or climb up the ladder because your work was great. You just got credited for it by giving you a little certificate and a little award, and that was nice. And then they then took it to where they would put the pictures or the portraits that you had done in the little weekly exposure book. And I had a lot of those as well. And then eventually they would put them on the wall in the studio. And I love that. I never really saw that mine was so special. I just thought I was doing what I was taught, doing what I've learned. And, I had a great child or good baby or good family or whatever. And it just all came together. It's not everything that you do is that perfect. You tell them to sit there beside the table, put your hand on your child, and keep your hand there. And they never did that. To that monitor, let me watch the monitor. I won't ever forget this one child. She went to roll off the table, and it was because the mother was watching the monitor. And I dove between the camera and the main light, and grabbed her and then rolled to the floor. Well, I had the other 15 people behind me, and they all started laughing. And I'm the one that rolled on the floor. It was all fun, though. And it was good, but Olan Mills was really good to me, and I worked a lot. I did a lot of overtime. I did a lot of just what I call blood, sweat, and tears. It felt like I worked till I dropped. But overall, I look back on it today. I couldn't do it today in a million, but I look back on it today, and I enjoyed it. If I didn't enjoy it, I wouldn't have hung in there. And, they certainly built my self-esteem up. I was very shy. I didn't touch nobody. I didn't want to touch nobody, but I had to touch everybody in the camera room. And what was so funny is after almost 30-something years of touching people and maneuvering them around and whatever I needed to do, they went to where don't touch nobody. And I'm like, oh, you are kidding me. Even now I'll look at people and I'll see a necklace out of place and I want to straighten it. A hair is out of place, I want to straighten it. Their shirt button isn't buttoned all the way and their tie is crooked and different things like that is whenever you think about all the things that you did as whatever position in sales, I had to constantly remember all the packages and start out with the big packages and then have to come back with some kind of rebuttal when they turned me down. But I finally learned that when you're in the camera room, that was near the end and before Life Touch came, but around that time too, you learn that when you're talking to people in the camera room, you're able to understand what their desire. But yeah, there was a lot of changes for this new things coming about, sitting that we're doing. I went from standing up to a lot whenever crawling around on the floor. I actually got so good on my knees, I wanted to stay what I did in the camera room into the sales, and that helped. You could do everything a lot. Easy. Still didn't make me great. Well, I miss my fellow workers. There's good and bad to all of it, as having someone else to sell your work. I was really blessed in the early years that I had two really good salespeople, and they were there for 17 years with me. And so I was really blessed in that way. They could sell you dirt, so, but yeah. But yeah, there was a lot of changes, a lot of new things coming about. I went from standing up to crawling around on the floor. I actually got so good on my knees, I wanted to stay there, because you could do everything just easy. I miss my fellow workers. I did have a really good group several times in the years that I was there. I had some bad ones too, but that's the way life is. You get good and bad. You can't have everything perfect. You just do what you do. Yeah, vacuum the carpet, clean the bathrooms, nothing to it. I mean, no matter what position that you got, you still have to do everything else. You still got to sweep the floor. You still got to pick up the toys. You still got to make sure everything is folded up. You've got to make sure everything is straight. Everything is set for your customers the next day. And all your reports is called in by a certain time of day. So it's just, it was kind of like a balancing act, mostly for me. And I learned to juggle and talk and walk and all at the same time, believe it or not. You can't do it today, but yeah, then I did. And I was there until I was 58, I think, is when I left. Learned a lot of good color, a lot of lightings, and things of that nature. It was a Canon, at least mine was, and it did pretty good. Whenever you had issues with it, you had to have good eyesight to see every little word or number on it, and that's kind of a joke because at the end it was like my eyesight's going. I can tell I can't see nothing. But when we went to that was really good, and then they were, and still some studios were already, we hadn't been yet, was going to be totally handheld. Mine was on a big stand that was longer, that's almost up to the ceiling, but it would go all the way down to the floor within 3 or 4 inches, and you could turn it over and flip it back and forth and that kind of a thing. And you could also raise it all the way up and shoot head down. And still not as good as with your hands, because you can do more. You can stand on something else to make you higher. But I did a lot of that, a lot of shooting from the top, shooting from the sides, and all angles I could think of, actually. And it was really cool because we were in a smaller studio. I went from a real tiny camera room, my first one, to a really big one, and then an even bigger one. And then I went back down to something between the smallest and the biggest, and about closer to the smallest. But with the 35 millimeter, you could do different things like that. You could still get a full head to toe shot, and you could do most brides. With the earlier cameras, the 108, I could, oh wow, I could get a really long train in there and every inch of it. When we went to the 35 millimeter, I couldn't. They would be a lot of times the corners or the edges, or she'd lose a foot here or there. So 35 millimeter was good, but really the 108 was amazing. In fact, my husband and I, we were married in 2001, and I actually took our engagement pictures and framed them and everything. And I was sitting right next to him, and looking into the monitor. And some of the best pictures that we have of us together was whenever I was looking over his shoulder at the monitor, and he was just sitting there looking at me, grinning, and he was making me laugh. So it was cool that I could do that. I didn't have to be there at the camera itself. It's like a rail. It was like a stand that went all the way down to the base of at the base of the stand. That was about 4 inches from the floor. So you still had those, like the 4 legs, to move it around. And it was on that, and it would go from the top to the bottom. You could flip it over. It had another piece of equipment on it that allowed you to do a lift up and turn it over kind of thing. So that was good. There were times that you could take it off, and eventually that's what they were doing, is getting rid of the stand to where you could actually just hold the camera and work with it. Look what a great company it became, and of all the thousands and thousands of people, I mean, even to the person that puts the stamp on the paycheck, if you set us all down in the room, we would all have so many wonderful stories to share, good and bad, funny. I really respected Olan Mills. I met Mr. Mills and Mr. C.G. Mills, and I really had a lot of respect for them, and for the job that they had created. I loved it. I really did love my job. And I don't know a lot of people that can say that. I was very blessed to have it, and it took care of me a long time. And I hope that if anybody remembers me, that they remember me as not just being an Olan Mills employee, but an Olan Mills child, I guess, a part of who they were. And that I stood for them, and I enjoyed working for them. Certainly love my customers. I did. We actually went into taking lingerie pictures for a while. We did it like for a little over maybe a year or two. I'll never forget Linda Nelson. I'll never forget her words to me. She was at the studio one time, and she was telling me about the studio was going to change, because we used to have an individual dressing room, and this was something that had changed through the years. In the beginning, they didn't have that. Go to the bathroom. But then whenever we went to a bigger studio, much bigger, we had a dressing room. And she was telling me that they were going to take that out. And I'm like, what? Are you kidding? And I said, where are our lingerie people going to go change? Because you could leave the dressing room, come into the camera room, see? And she went, now, Debbie, she says, I am not familiar with lingerie. We don't do lingerie portraits here. And I was like, oh, okay. We've only been doing them almost 2 years. Thank you for telling me that. But she was one you didn't argue with. You didn't, whatever she said, it was there. You had to say, okay, yes, ma'am, I'll take care of that. And after that, we quit doing them. But I still got people that wanted to come in bathing suits. I had clowns. I had one guy that was a clown. He was in clown college, and he wanted me to take him pictures upside down in his clown outfit, so I did. I had bodybuilders, men and women bodybuilders, come in, and I'm going to tell you something. They have a lot over the lingerie people. You really have to watch them people. Their clothes are, oh my God. But they would do all their little poses and stuff like that. Oh my Lord. Had a magician that I did for years. And she would come in and do tricks and all this, and I'd photograph it. And she was so happy to have them done. Definitely interesting people and good supervisors. And Olan Mills, I think, deserved a lot of respect. And they certainly did a good thing for people in the world that really valued their work. And today still treasures it. Some people will never go to anyone else ever again. I just enjoyed working with everyone. I loved them. I love my job. And it took a wonderful man to pull me away from my job. But, I really enjoyed doing it. And I'll never forget the babies. I loved the babies. It didn't matter if they threw up on me. I mean, I had one throw up on me one time that just soaked every piece of clothes I had on. And it smelled so bad, I had to change. I couldn't even photograph anyone else after that. But I enjoyed the interaction that I had with people and the work that I did for them. I am very thankful that I had it and that I got to touch their life in some way with it. And Olan Mills gave me that opportunity to make memories with people that I would have never met.
Thank you for listening to the People of Olan Mills podcast.